Shortly before the year was over, that is to say, the year's worth of time that I was the temporary director, one of the board members came to visit me. I was informed by him that I had done an excellent job and that the board had finally found a suitable replacement. I was overjoyed. And then I was told the name of the new director, Dr. Ogdenson. I was shocked. Yes, I knew of Dr. Ogdenson. Practically everyone who worked with the mentally ill and the criminally insane knew his name, and I was very much surprised that the board had chosen him as the new director. The board had always been very conservative, very slow to act, unless there was a sudden emergency that absolutely required their attention. It was the way things had always been done. And often, the board was very careful in replacing members who had grown too old and retired from the board. Very careful indeed. This was a most radical choice. Dr. Ogdenson was known for his radical methods used at other asylums. And I am forced to admit that his methods, more often than not, were very successful, especially with patients who were considered hopeless cases. Dr. Ogdenson was an extremely wealthy doctor from an extremely wealthy old money family. It was just such a bewildering thing that he would be chosen. Like a rabbit, he would hop from insane asylum to insane asylum, leaving behind some individuals whom it could honestly be said was cured. But he also left behind many patients whose condition worsened. There was an incident in Boston involving a female patient. Shortly before Dr. Ogdenson left that particular asylum, the young woman chose to end her life. I was not happy about this decision. But yet again, what could I do? This was the board, so I bit my tongue. I was asked by this board member to not mention the fact that Dr. Ogdenson would be taking over to the other doctors, that the board would do it in their own good time. Their own good time was roughly 3 days before Dr. Ogdenson arrived. And his arrival was most disastrous. Where to begin? He fired a third of the staff, saying that there was waste at the mental asylum. Other than the security personnel, every single category of employee was reduced. And then came his treatment of the patients. Where to begin? Dr. Weber, as I mentioned earlier, was not a real doctor. He was a patient who believed himself to be a real doctor. And, in fact, behaved that way. Well, imagine my surprise to find that Dr. Odginson had told the orderlies to strip Dr. Weber of the white lab coat that we had issued him. Weber immediately flew into a rage. It was unlike him. He had to be placed into a straitjacket. I found him whimpering in the corner of his cell in a fetal position, most undignified. That white lab coat kept him calm. This was anything but calm. What happened to Maggie was even worse, the woman who believed herself to be the Queen of England. Apparently, according to the orderlies, Dr. Odginson had berated her, telling her that she was, how shall I put this politely, far from royalty. She screamed, she cried. She was an absolute mess when I saw her. Very undignified. Just the poor woman. She did not deserve this. And finally, Mr. Jenkins, I was horrified to learn that Dr. Odginson had told the orderlies to burn all of the patients' writings. And of course, he confiscated the fountain pen, seeing it as absurd that a mental patient should have a weapon. My blood began to boil over. This had been within the first 3 days that he had taken over the asylum. I had been given a day off, which I enjoyed very much in the village, and this was the utter horror and mess that I returned to. I tried to keep my temper in check. Well, it did not work. I confronted Dr. Odginson in his new office. I berated him for his cruelty and the disgusting manner in which he was treating the patients. I told him I didn't care who his family was, that what he was doing was obscene. To my surprise, when I was done, he did not immediately fire me or throw me out of his office. He looked at me and very calmly said that he understood that I was under a great deal of pressure. He understood that either Dr. Gaines or Dr. Adler should have volunteered to take over as temporary director, that he understood that the board was slow to find a new director, and that a year was absolutely inexcusable. However, far from being sympathetic, Dr. Odginson made it very clear to me that this one outburst would be overlooked and forgiven, but that any other such outburst would cause me to not only be thrown out on my ear, but that he would use his family influence to absolutely destroy my career and blackball me from ever being able to work as a doctor again, that I would be fortunate to work as a veterinarian in some pathetic excuse for a town. He then told me good day. As I walked out of his office, I should have felt lucky. I did not. This miserable excuse for a human being had decided to give me one chance, and one chance only. I wished to spit in his face. Over the next several weeks, things only got worse and worse. Whatever influence Angela seemed to have, Dr. Odginson's policies, new policies, made it very clear that the patients would not be very calm for very long, even in Angela's presence. Eventually, Dr. Odginson learned of Angela. He was disgusted by the fact that a patient was allowed basically free roam of the hospital. At one point in time, he nearly caught her in the kitchen, but the two ladies working there had concealed her behind their backs as they stood shoulder to shoulder, addressing Dr. Odginson. As for the other doctors and staff, there was one time I caught Bertha sharpening a large knife. I knew it was missing from the kitchen, but I said nothing. When Director Davis had passed away, he had bestowed his lovely ornate shotgun upon Dr. Gaines. I found him in his office polishing it. When I spoke to him about it, and I spoke about the new director as well, he did not smile. He simply said, "What a tragedy it would be if such a beautiful shotgun accidentally went off in the director's office." I simply nodded and backed out of Dr. Gaines's office. I was then called into Dr. Odginson's office. He had wasted no time in removing Dr. Davis's name from the director's office door. Yes, he wasted no time at all. I entered his office. He wanted to speak with Angela. What could I do? I went to her room. I told her the doctor wished to speak with her in the director's office. Strangely, she smiled at me as I sat on the edge of her bed. She stood up, patted me on the head, and said that everything would be all right. Shortly after she entered the director's office, there was a horrible scream. Myself, Dr. Gaines, and one of the orderlies was the first to hear it. We rushed in. We found Angela calmly standing in one corner. Director Ogden's hair had turned white. He was ranting and raving like one of the lunatics in the asylum. From what I could tell, at least according to what he was raving about, Angela had entered his office and had told him that he needed to leave and that it would be in his best interest to do so. Apparently, she meant leave the asylum forever. He laughed at her. She smiled at him, and apparently she reached over her head, grabbed a patch of skin on her neck from the opposite side of her arm, and pulled her entire face away. Dr. Ogdenson screamed that she was a horrific demon with large, horrible black claws, and that she had told him in a demonic voice that he needed to leave. That's when he screamed and his hair turned white. He continued ranting and raving. We had to tackle him, restrain him. What could the board do? They replaced him immediately, and I was back as the new temporary director. This time, I would be there for many, many years, and ironically, I did not mind. One day, shortly afterwards, I asked Dr. Gaines about Angela. He said, "Oh yes, well, the little girl was found in the woods about 40 years ago." This shocked me. I asked him if he was sure, and he said that he was. Dr. Gaines was going to retire soon, and apparently he was significantly older than I thought he was. Well, you read the papers we received. Everything happening here in the 1990s, it's just clearly these were sent here by mistake. I'm just going to toss them into the fireplace. I'll take care of it tomorrow. I have to get ready for Angela's birthday party. She's such a sweet little girl. I think she'll enjoy what I got for her. But honestly, demon indeed. How ridiculous.